Welcome to the Deep Dive. We sift through sources to pull out the key insights, basically giving you a fast track to getting informed.
And today, we're tackling a huge topic, the history of Karnataka.
Huge is right. We're talking millennia here, from way back in prehistory right up to today. It's a long, very dynamic story.
It really is, and we'll be drawing on, archaeological finds, historical records.
Yeah.
The works, really.
Our mission, then, is to give you a richer feel for Karnataka's past than just, say, a list of dates. We want to find those surprising bits, the key moments that really shaped things.
Sounds good. Where should we start? Right at the beginning.
Let's do it. Prehistoric Karnataka, echoes of the past.
Okay, so we can begin with the Mesolithic period. That's roughly 8,000 down to 3,000 BCE.
So, really ancient. What was happening then?
Well, you have early humans at sites like
Salvadagi and Maralabavi.
and they're making tools. Think parallel-sided blades and these tiny, sharp stone tools called microliths.
Microliths. Those are pretty versatile, weren't they? Often part of bigger tools.
Exactly. That move towards smaller composite tools suggests they were getting smarter about materials, maybe developing more specific ways to hunt or process food. It's a key step.
Okay, and then things change again, right? With the Neolithic.
Yeah, around 3000 BCE onwards, we see the Neolithic period kick off. And this is where you start seeing actual settlements appearing. Places like
Ammagiri, Jalahalli, Ellur.
Settlements mean agriculture is starting?
that's a big part of it, yes. Beginnings of agriculture. Plus, you see advances in tools, polished stone axes, adze, chisels. They still use microliths, but now you also see very early copper objects appearing.
So a real technological jump.
Definitely. And it's interesting, the first Neolithic site in Karnataka was actually found way back in 1842 in the Lingasugar area. So people have known about these ancient layers for a long time.
Wow, 1842. And we're still finding new things. You mentioned a Mesolithic site.
Idura Kunjadi,
That's more recent work and
Kundapura.
to look. Dates back to maybe 6000 BCE.
And what did they find there?
A really interesting mix of tools, actually. Not the geometric ones you sometimes see, but blades, scrapers, burins, even things like fluted cores and arrowheads, simple flakes. It gives us a broader picture of their toolkit in that specific area.
Okay, so we've got early tools, the
Yeah.
start of farming. What comes next? Those big stone structures.
The megalithic era, exactly. Roughly 1200 to 300 BCE. This is where iron technology comes in.
Ah, iron. That must have changed things dramatically.
Hugely. For farming, for potential conflict, everything. And this period is also known for its complex burial rituals. We've found over 700 megalithic sites across Karnataka.
700, that's a lot. Any famous ones?
Benakal.
Probably one of the most significant, it's extensive, lots of different types of monuments.
And these monuments, dolmens, cairn circles, you said, what do they tell us about the people?
Well, building things on that scale.
Hmm.
It strongly suggests societies were getting more organized. You probably needed leadership to marshal the labor, maybe the beginnings of social hierarchy, social stratification.
Right. It takes coordination to build something like that. Okay, so that takes us through prehistory. How do we get from there to actual kingdoms?
We start seeing that transition in the early historical period, say 300 BCE to 500 CE. First, you get some indirect influence from the
Nanda.
Empire, which was based further north.
Indirect influence. How so?
Evidence suggests they were accumulating wealth from parts of Karnataka, likely using local chiefs as vassals, and setting up more centralized taxation. It's like an early taste of larger state administration for the region.
Interesting. And then comes a really big name, the Mauryans.
Yes, the Mauryan Empire. Under Chandragupta Maurya, their influence spread deep into the south, including parts of Karnataka, and they brought their administrative systems with them.
Like the Grammika and Nagarika.
Exactly. Systems for managing villages and towns, trade, agriculture, much more efficient centralized control. You could argue this really laid the groundwork for future large empires in the area. It showed how to manage big territories.
And we have solid evidence of them being there.
Oh, absolutely. Ashoka's famous rock edicts. They've been found at Moski and
Siddhapura.
here in Karnataka.
And those weren't just orders from the top, were they?
No, they promoted Buddhist principles, Ashoka's idea of dharma, righteous governance. Plus, the Mauryans invested in infrastructure roads, rest houses that would help tie the region together, boosted trade.
Okay, so the Mauryans make their mark. Who follows them?
The Satavahanas. They rise around the 1st century BCE and control a big chunk of the Deccan, definitely including northern Karnataka.
And they had rivals, didn't they? The Western Kshatrapas.
Right, there was quite a bit of conflict there. And it wasn't just about land. A lot of it was about controlling key trade routes connecting places like
Nasik.
and Ujjain. So these conflicts directly shaped Karnataka's early economy.
And there was one Satavahana ruler who really expanded their power.
Gautamiputra Satakarni.
Reigned about 106 to 130 CE. He pushed Satavahana control much wider. And this seems to have helped boost maritime trade too. We're talking connections between Karnataka's ports and Roman Egypt.
Wow, Roman Egypt. And culturally, what did the Satavahanas leave behind?
Well, their coins are interesting bilingual, with Prakrit and early Dravidian scripts. That tells you something about the languages being used. They also patronized Buddhist sites, like the stupas at Banavasi. So you see this mix of cultural influences, and it's kind of foundational for later literary traditions.
So, with the Mauryas and Satavahanas having left their indelible mark on the region, the stage was set for new, homegrown powers to emerge. And that's where the Kadamba dynasty comes into the picture. From 345 CE to 525 CE, the Kadambas emerged as one of Karnataka's earliest native kingdoms. Picture this, they established rule over northern Karnataka and the Konkan coastal region, operating from their capital at Banavasi, that's in present-day Uttara Kannada district. Founded in the mid-4th century, the Kadambas represented a major step toward organized state formation, really building on earlier administrative influences. While detailed information on them can be a bit scarce, the historical records we do have point to the fact that they were huge supporters of Brahmanical traditions and also played a key role in contributing to early Kannada literary development, which is super cool. The Kadambas worked to establish their political legitimacy through strategic alliances, military conquests, the usual ruler stuff, and patronage of religious institutions. Their rule really laid important foundations for all the dynasties that came after them. They were establishing administrative systems and cultural patterns that would end up influencing Karnataka for centuries. Sadly, though, all good things must come to an end, and the Kadamba rule faded out in the early 6th century, being supplanted by the rising power of the Chalukyas of Badami.
Okay, so we've covered these early empires. Now, the early medieval period. You called it a tapestry of dynasties. Sounds complex.
It is a bit, but also fascinating. This is where regional powers really come into their own.
Around 350 CE, a time when multiple native clans were asserting their independence following the weakening of the Pallava Empire, the Western Ganga dynasty emerged. Initially, they carved out their rule from Kolar, but later, they smartly moved their capital to Talikota, right on the banks of the Kaveri River in modern Mysore district. The Western Gangas maintained their sovereignty for a time, from approximately 350 to 550 CE, before they eventually accepted overlordship from the ever-expanding imperial Chalukyas of Badami.
Take the Chalukyas of Badami.
Pulakeshito.
Ken is the big name there, isn't he?
Absolutely. Ruled 610-642 CE. He managed to unify a large part of the Deccan, famously defeated Harsha, the big emperor up north, and also fought the
Pallava.
to the south, really established Chalukya dominance.
And their capital
Badami Vatapi.
back then was important.
A major political and cultural hub. The Chalukyas were brilliant architects. They developed this amazing style that blended northern Nagara and southern Dravida elements. You see it beautifully at Paradakal, especially the Virupaksha temple.
Incredible. And administratively, any innovations?
Yes, they used Agrahara's land grants to scholars, Brahmins, which helped create centers of learning, and they had a well-structured military, sort of a tripartite system, which helped them stay powerful.
Okay, so after the Badami Chalukyas,
The Rashtrakutas take over. Their capital was at Manyaketa. Amoghavarsha was a standout ruler here, reigned 814-878 CE.
what was he known for? Conquests.
Yes, extensive conquests from Malwa down to Tamil Nadu,
Yeah.
but also diplomacy. They actually got involved in mediating conflicts up in North India, like the big struggle for Kannauj.
And culturally, the Rashtrakutas were also significant.
Hugely. Think of the Kalasanatha temple at Ellora. That's
Yeah.
just astounding carved from a single rock face. Shows incredible ambition and skill.
Wow.
And Amoghavarsha himself is linked to a major...
Kannada literary work Kaviraja Marga.
tells us a lot about poetry and culture back then, and the growing importance of regional languages. It's a great example of political power and cultural achievement going hand in hand.
Then the Chalukya name comes back again.
It does, with the Western Chalukyas of Kalyani. Kind of a revival.
Vikramaditya 6th.
Is the key ruler, reigning 1076-1126 CE. He even started his own calendar era, the Chalukya Vikrama era.
What else were they known for?
Well, a really lasting contribution was their support for law. Vijayanagara wrote the Mitishara under their patronage, a hugely influential text on Hindu law, but their time was also marked by constant fighting with the Cholas, mainly over the fertile Tungabhadra basin.
Right, so constant shifts in power. That brings us to the late medieval period, 1200 to 1600 CE. You mentioned a cultural peak.
Yes, especially with the Hoysalas. They ruled from about 1026 to 1343. If you want to see incredible temple architecture, look at the Hoysalas.
Belur and Halebidu.
Exactly. The Chemikisava temple at Belur, the Hoysala temple at Halebidu, the detail in the carvings is just mind-blowing. They depict entire stories from the epics. It's peak craftsmanship.
And then comes another major player, Vijayanagara.
The Vijayanagara Empire, founded around 1336, it really emerged as a powerful Hindu kingdom, sort of a bulwark against the Sultanates expanding from the north.
Krishnadevaraya's reign is often called a golden age.
It is, yeah, early 16th century. He invested in things like irrigation. The Hiriya Canal was a major project for agriculture, and he was a huge patron of the arts and literature. Think of someone like Tenali Rama, the famous witty poet. He was supposedly at Krishnadevaraya's court.
But this period also sees the rise of the Sultanates in the Deccan.
Yes, the Bahmani Sultanate, which had broken off from Delhi earlier, eventually splits into 5 separate sultanates around the early 16th century. And one of them, Bijapur, controlled a lot of northern Karnataka.
Any notable rulers from Bijapur?
Ibrahim Adil Shah II is fascinating. Ruled late 16th, early 17th century. He was a great patron of the arts, fostering this unique Deccani style, a blend of Hindu and Islamic traditions. The Gold Gumbaz in Bijapur is the prime example. Amazing acoustics in that dome.
Gol Gumbaz, right.
Yep.
But the relationship between Vijayanagara and these sultanates wasn't always peaceful, was it?
Far from it. It all comes to a head at the Battle of Talikota in 1565.
That was the decisive one?
Absolutely decisive. The combined forces of the Deccan Sultanates crushed the Vijayanagara army. They sacked the capital city afterwards. It was a massive turning point, culturally and politically. Really shifted the balance of power in South India towards the Sultanates.
A major blow to Vijayanagara. Okay, so that defeat reshuffles the deck again. Entering the early modern period, around 1600 to 1800, who fills the power vacuum?
Well, you see new regional players emerge.
Like the Nayakas of Keladi in the coastal and Malenadu regions.
What were they known for?
They put up resistance against Portuguese pirates on the coast, which was important for trade. And they were also involved in mediating between the Mughals and the rising Marathas. There's a famous story about Queen Keladi defeating a Mughal general in 1697.
A queen defeating a Mughal general. Impressive.
Shows their strength and independence. At the same time, you have the Marathas under Shivaji expanding southwards. They took over territories from Bijapur and started introducing their own land grant system, the Mokasa, into parts of Karnataka.
And meanwhile, Mysore is on the rise.
Yes. The Wadiyar dynasty in Mysore was gradually building its power.
Chikkadevaraja Odiyar.
Ruling in the late 17th century was particularly key. He expanded Mysore's territory and brought in important administrative reforms, centralized taxes, standard weights and measures. Really strengthened the state.
Tipu Sultan and Hyder Ali.
Right. They really transformed Mysore in the later 18th century. Hyder Ali rose through military skill, effectively took control, and his son Tipu continued building Mysore into a major military force.
They had modern weapons, didn't they? French help.
They did. French-trained artillery and famously rockets. Tipu's rockets were quite advanced for their time. He also tried to boost the economy, establishing a silk industry.
Tipu also looked beyond India for alliances.
Yes. He sought an alliance with the Ottoman Caliphate around 1786. He was fiercely anti-British, resisting the East India Company's expansion. His final stand and death at 1799 is famous.
But his legacy is complex, isn't it?
It is. He's seen as an anti-colonial hero by many, but there were also instances of forced conversions during his reign, which makes his historical assessment quite mixed. After his defeat, the British put the Wadiyars back on the throne, but Mysore was now essentially under British control.
Which leads us into the colonial era proper, 1800 to 1947.
Yeah, and under the British, Karnataka wasn't a single unit. It got carved up. Parts went to the Bombay Presidency, parts to Madras. Some areas were under the Nizam of Hyderabad, and then you had the princely state of Mysore itself.
Fragmented. But resistance didn't just stop.
No, definitely not. You still had uprisings like the
Nagar.
Rebellion in 1830 or the
Bedas of Hallagalli.
Revolting during the 1857 uprising. Pockets of resistance continued.
Within that system, though, Mysore is often pointed to as being well-run.
Under Krishnaraja Wadiyar IV, especially in the early 20th century, yes, Mysore gained a reputation as a model state. They undertook progressive initiatives like pioneering hydroelectric projects, and founded key institutions. The Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore is a prime example. So there was modernization happening even under British paramountcy.
Okay, fast forward to independence in 1947. Karnataka, as we know it, didn't exist immediately, did it?
No. There was a strong movement called the Ekakarana movement, pushing for unification of all the speaking regions scattered across different administrative units. People like Aluru Venkatarao were key figures.
And that led to the States Reorganization Act.
Exactly, in 1956. That act brought the speaking areas together into Mysore state. It wasn't actually renamed Karnataka until 1973.
And what were the priorities for the new state initially?
In the early decades, there was a big focus on land reforms. The 1974 Land Reforms Act was significant, and also on industrialization, trying to build up the state's economy.
Laying the groundwork for what came later.
Pretty much. That focus on education industry, it eventually paved the way for the IT boom. Companies like Infosys starting up in the early 80s that was built on those earlier foundations. And that, of course, transformed Bangalore and Karnataka into the tech hub it is today. A continuation, in a way, of that long history of adaptation.
It really is an incredible sweep of history we've covered. Millennia. From stone tools to silicon ships, almost.
It is. And if there's one thread running through it all, it's maybe this capacity for adaptive innovation, whether it's ancient trade networks, medieval temple architecture, or modern tech.
Each era seems to have added a layer to Karnataka's identity, making it very pluralistic.
Absolutely. Empires rose and fell, cultures blended, conflicts happened, but there's this underlying resilience and ability to absorb and innovate.
So we've journeyed from prehistoric settlements right up to the present day. We've seen empires, cultural peaks, massive battles, colonial rule, and the forging of a modern identity.
A testament, really, to Karnataka's enduring dynamism.
So the final thought we want to leave you, the listener, with is this. How does this incredibly long, complex, multifaceted history continue to resonate today? How does it shape Karnataka's identity and its path forward in our globalized world?
Yeah, it's something to think about. Maybe explore a particular dynasty or period that caught your interest during our deep dive today. There's always more to uncover.